Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. This is a podcast about marketing technology, what it is, how it works, and what the opportunities are for the brands and agencies that want to use them. I interview interesting people that I know and that I also like. So it gives me massive pleasure to introduce Rachel Falconer.
Hello. Hello, Tom. Great to be here.
That's good that you put your thumb up first.
I thought I'd do
in a
that first.
non-audio way. Can you tell the audience who may not be familiar with your work what you do?
Yeah, of course. So, hi there. I'm Rachel Falconer. I'm head of Goldsmiths Digital Studios, which is a spin-out of Goldsmiths University. We're a creative technology prototyping studio offering fast or rapid prototyping and innovation solutions to the creative industries. I guess our specialisations, our main ones are virtual reality, AI, machine learning, signal processing, and a number of different other technologies that have a creative outlet. We're really set up to be a test bed for industry and a space for creative experimentation for technology-driven creative experiences.
And you used to be an advertising person.
I did. I used to work originally at McCann Erickson, Milan, Italy, as a TV producer. And then I moved into what was then viral advertising before moving back to the UK.
And then how did you go from that into ruling the roost at Goldsmiths?
So I actually went back to college. I went to the Royal College of Art and did a curating course and specialised in digital art and networked creativity, and then kind of sidestepped back into my original sort of area of expertise, which was industrial design and communication design in particular. So I then started working for Space Studios and ran their digital arts and design residency as part of the Bloomberg Foundation's initiative, running the White Building in Hackney Wick and working on different digital art and design projects. Before moving into Goldsmiths in my present role.
So it's customary on this podcast for me to ask semi-awkward getting to know you questions. Do you mind if I ask you a couple?
You go for it.
Cool. So, right, let's go in with a big one. We'll rev it up a bit. What has been your biggest, horriblest, most embarrassing work failure that has then subsequently set you up for success?
So, I mean, I think working in creative tech, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because things fuck up all the time. You know, I guess my pattern in my career has been setting things up. So setting up like a co-working space for creative technologists in an area of London called the hardware or open hardware short mile a few years ago. And I guess the area wasn't actually ready for kind of the open hardware or distributed manufacturing scene at the time, but people were interested.
Hold on,
go for it.
The open hardware distribution scene.
Open hardware.
Open
hardware. So okay, right. So I'll give you.
Can you explain what that means? Sorry, I've never heard those words.
So
before.
You know 3D printing.
Yeah.
Otherwise known as distributed manufacturing. So the idea is you send a blueprint of something to somebody in Thailand and they can make your design for you.
Yeah.
And without paying for it. So it's like software, open source software, but translated into the hardware space. So there was a really cool company called OpenDesk, which I think is still going in Mare Street in Hackney, and their kind of business model was predicated on open hardware. So sending blueprints, full furniture to be manufactured elsewhere in the world. Yeah.
Okay. And so your career has been setting these things up?
Yeah, I guess the pattern is that setting up collaborative working situations within a networked situation, i.e. not just a studio where people sit around and discuss ideas and make something as a result of that, but perhaps looking at more distributed ways of working. So working with people physically distributed around the world, but also looking at different interdisciplinary crossovers that might occur within a collaborative environment.
So come on, be honest. What are those failures? Tell me about a specific one where you were like, oh my god, I've totally balls that up. And then how did you recover from that?
So we're getting to specifics here.
Yeah, come on, let's get specific.
Let's get nitty-gritty about it. So I think setting up a co-working space for creative practitioners to come in and I guess experiment with ideas, I hadn't really taken into account the fact that people are not necessarily going to want to share their creative ideas with the person sat next to them at the desk, and perhaps the companies that are actually associated with them aren't that happy about their ideas bleeding into a room full of creative people. So you've got this kind of utopian view of, this collaborative atmosphere that you want to create, but you haven't, I didn't really take into account the fact that there would be, this kind of bleed of ideas or fear of the bleed of ideas, or this kind of territorial attitude towards the leaking of prototyping ideas.
And how were they leaking?
Well, if you had somebody from one company sitting next to another person from another company working out as a sort of outsourced researcher and prototyper, so developing things for their company, but on a very experimental level, which was the reason I set up the space for these things to breathe and grow. There would be the potential for IP issues to arise if somebody had made something.
And did that happen?
There were concerns that it would happen, which was why we had to kind of put stoppers on the whole situation for a while. So that was horrible.
And give me some sense of the scale of that. Was it like
so we'd
6
set
months
everything
or a
up?
year?
Yeah, this was the pilot year, so we'd set everything up. Everybody was keen to go. There had been a number of different sprints, and I'd run a number of different workshops, and things were getting quite a lot of attention and really getting up and going. And this situation occurred. I think one organisation actually clocked onto the fact that there could potentially be a leakage of ideas in a collaborative space, which is of course possible. I mean, that's going to happen.
Kind of the point.
That's the whole point. Yeah. But I think that's kind of indicative of a lot of the way things are working at the moment, with IP being kind of an afterthought, intellectual property and all the kind of legal and legislative infrastructure being kind of an afterthought. Whereas in fact, I think from that experience, I've found that particularly with Goldsmiths Digital Studios, it has to be one of the first things that you use in crafting the business model, is it, in the first place.
So with that in mind, you'd have had to learn to say no to some situations because you've seen it not working in the past. So in the last kind of 3, 4, 5 years, what else have you become better at saying no to professionally?
Without sounding too cliched about it, which I think that question you can fall down a rabbit hole on that one a number of times. But I would say, as a curator, I'm also a digital art curator. Is you've got to be selective. You've got to aggregate your network of people that you spend time with. I think time is not necessarily money, but time is a resource that you have to be careful with, particularly within a social networking space that you hope to leverage into a professional opportunity. So I'm not saying sort of cut out the dead wood, but it's important to choose who you want to spend your professional time with.
The dead wood. And this is in a physical social space, right?
Yeah.
This isn't just people on
LinkedIn. So if you're at a convention, or if you're at a festival, or if you're going to a meetup or something like that, then I think I've found that particularly within the creative tech space, there's a lot of people wanting to get in there. And you've got to find natural affiliations with people and be true to that.
So, do you think that that networking becomes more difficult in that scenario? what I mean. So you as a curator and organizer of spaces and so on, your time and energy and resource is sought after. So you kind of attracting dead wood as well as talent. Like how do you manage networking in that scenario?
There is that as well. I mean, that's painting a picture of me as being a very kind of sought after, egotistical creature. But I think we all are. When we enter into a networking situation, we all have an agenda. We've all got something to either learn or to give, and I think it's really important to be aware of what your positioning is within that. So that your attitude might change depending on what kind of social, professional situation you find yourself in, and it's important to always, I think, what I've learned over the last few years is to be clear about what you would like to either give or learn from the situation.
Right, and you think like that for every networking or network situation you go into?
Without excluding happy coincidences or being open to new encounters. I think maybe we've learnt that maybe from social networking as well. I think maybe that's a behaviour that's translated into the real world, that we are aggregators of people.
Do you know,
don't know.
It's true. We are aggregators of people. I hadn't thought of it like that. I mean, I realised last night when I was chatting to some mates and made me dinner that socials has changed the way that we say goodbye to people. Like, but we were saying that when we were kids and we had anyone visit us, family or friends, you'd wave them off.
Yeah.
You'd go to the front door and you'd wave
wait till
like
they
mad.
go around the corner.
Yeah, yeah, right. And that was because literally you weren't going to see them again for however long. And whereas now, like at Christmas, I left after being there for a week. And honestly, I said goodbye to like 3 people. I'm like, will you just really tell them I'm off? I mean, I'm assuming it's not because they just don't like me. But you think, I will. That's definitely not the last time I'm going to see them.
Yeah. So there is that bleeding of behaviour that you've begun to notice.
So kind of take a slightly different tack here.
Yeah.
So what's the most useful thing that you've bought with your own money that you've used at work?
I think I'm going to flip that and say I'm looking at decreasing the things that I have and the devices that I use as professional props. So a lot of my job is finding or spotting talent and matchmaking, looking at people or services or businesses or artists, etc., that have a potential crossover with each other. And there are loads of different ways and tools for doing that, but I've reverted to something as lame as a notebook. I've got rid of a lot of my sort of technical props, even though I kind of work in the tech space.
And what kind of notebook do you use? Is it like A4, lots of different coloured pens?
It has to be really specific. It has to be a really good quality paper that I use that's easy to use with a pencil. So I've gone right back to kind of very, very basics. And I used to be gadgeted up to the eyeballs. I mean, that used to be a particular, because when you work in the tech environment, you're bombarded with, maybe free technical tools that you can try out and different things. So it's almost like it came to a point of saturation. And I think that's again a process of elimination rather than relying on something.
Can I tell you about one thing though that I think that might add to that?
Go on,
I mean, you might think this is nonsense.
No, go for it.
There is an app called Scannable.
Yeah.
Is that not just sorry? What Scannable does is it takes a photo of your notes and then reinterprets that as if they were beautifully presented. So you can take a photo from an angle, but it'll just make it like head on, and then you can. The reason I don't use it is it links to Evernote, not Google Docs. So so that is
well, I use
too much
Evernote a lot, or used to. So that's really helpful. But I think taking that like onto the next level and look at natural language processing, soon we'll be able to really start working with our notes and our sort of tech support and devices in a much more intuitive way. Instead of like scanning our notes and transcribing them onto the digital format, it might be that a conversation could be taken up between our cognitive response, jotting something down on a piece of paper, and then how we decide to store and aggregate that on our device. I think we tend to collect and aggregate things more on our tablets, on our computers, on our phone, and we use the notebook perhaps as a way of, a first impression of something. But I think that the real, that's the kind of assimilation of man and machine, isn't it? Trying to get the cognitive process to kind of translate across everything that we use.
So I used to use pen and paper, and I'd write everything down, and then I'd go and type it all up.
Yeah.
And so now I just, like, every meeting I have is I open a Google Doc and just type, and then it's kind of done.
And it's done, yeah.
But do you think I'm missing out on something by not writing
I think
it down?
meetings are fine to do that. Perhaps more of the analytical work that you and I do could perhaps have more of a space, from notebook to computer or to our repository, or how we want to look at our Google Doc space. It could be a much smoother process. It could be more intuitive. And I think maybe technology could help us do that.
Yeah, it'd be nice if you could flip between two different modes. Like, I've got a friend, the only person I know is Matt Robbins of Burton. He has like a Samsung notebook with a pen, and every meeting I have with him, he writes it all down, and I'm always like, oh, that looks so good. But I'm not sure I want to spend 700 quid on a Samsung notebook. He's obviously doing better than me. Right, okay, so next random getting to know you question. If you had a digital media budget of 10 million quid to get any message out there, what would it be? And for the listeners who can't see what's going on, Rachel is giggling with glee. With
glee, but also like question back at you. Why would you pick that amount of money? What's the 10 million? Is that a?
It's an obscene amount of budget to spend on something.
It could be a tipping point. It might not be enough. It's one of those strange figures in ad spend that,
Well, I wonder what figure would cover every media property. Like,
this is what I'm thinking.
Like, if it's 50 billion, you could literally buy every space everywhere simultaneously.
Exactly.
So, Rachel, you've got £50 billion.
So we're chasing the big idea again now, aren't we, on this one, which is kind of what we're. Well, I'm not sure about that anymore as a thing, but the message would be the key thing to get right, wouldn't it? But
what would your message be? Stop skirting around. Why did you actually ask you a slightly different question? Why were you smiling so much when I asked you that question? And it can't be because of the figure of 10 million.
It's the question that that has been asked of people for generations, isn't it? Of within the ad world, is what's the correlation between money and the message? What is the power? Because if your message went out on one tweet, and if it was strong enough, and if it hit the right button, then it would have exactly the same impact as if it.
That's true. That's also an excellent politician's answer. But I'm going to push you on this. You could have the poo emoji and push out across 10 million quid's worth of media.
And I guess that would be my first reaction to that question. But I'm going to have to think about that. You can't push me for that.
Right,
I'm not sure how
enough.
Seriously I can take that question.
Right, so moving along. In the last 5 years, apart from learning to be a politician on difficult questions, which new belief or behaviour has most improved your work life?
So I think probably going back to the elimination and the clearing out of things. I think saying no. I think saying no to not necessarily just invitations or networking opportunities, but also no to some of the professional impulses that I think is becoming part of our learnt behaviour.
Like what?
I think the big thing for me is to create space as much as possible within a day, to try and look at things in a kind of big picture scenario. Like look at things from a big distance rather than trying to get your to-do list done. I think it's a common thing that people advise in like self-help books and professional help books, like Tim Ferriss, etc. But I think it's really important to create that space.
And I agree, but tell me how you do that. So it's Wednesday morning. You're half hungover, which might happen.
Can happen.
And then you've got 50 emails and you've got 4-hour-long meetings. How do you find the space to think creatively and strategically?
Well, I think the technical buzz is an addiction. So obviously, email is an addictive circuit that we get ourselves into. Meetings depends where you work, but you can't always avoid them. But you've got to try and schedule in that reflective time. And I think for particularly the job that I do at the moment, when you're setting something up that's quite complex, that involves a number of different criteria, and when you're trying to matchmake between perhaps two spaces or two industries that are at perhaps odds with each other, then you need that time to figure out how it's going to look in 5 months' time, 5 years' time. You need that space to project. And I don't think a normal workday as we live it now really creates the opportunity to do that, because it's very reactive, it's very responsive.
And so do you book that time in? Do you go like these 4 hours or this?
Yeah,
these
I do.
3 days?
I have to. Like that has to happen.
And is there a specific time of the week that you do that, or is it just I'll get?
I can bookend it. I can do Monday, Friday, but I also find like midweek is quite good because you've had time to do the firefighting, so you haven't got that anxiety. You can kind of book it in on a Wednesday, Thursday. It used to be 11 o'clock on Friday, didn't it? When in the 80s and 90s. I don't know if you've read there's been a lot of theories about that, but I think it's I think midweek is pretty good because you've had the opportunity to consolidate things that were perhaps hanging over you over the weekend, but you've got enough energy left in you to kind of like have a look at the rest of the week instead of going, let's go to the pub. And
you take the whole day to do that?
Take half a day if I can. If I haven't got anything like urgent, it's a good half day.
And sorry to be so specific, I find it fascinating. So will you do that in the office or will you go home?
No, definitely not in the office. Again, if I can get out, I get out. But also, even if you go to, for me, it works just moving out of my normal work environment. I don't really have a normal work environment at the moment, but when I did, it was definitely something that I tried to do was, dislocate myself from a, professional environment to try and find that space for reflection.
And okay, so brutal honesty time. How many times out of 10 will you do that on 10 average
like in a
weeks?
Month. Yeah. I mean, at the moment hardly any because it's pretty intense. But on a good month, I would probably say twice, which is enough.
Right.
Even once is enough, to be fair.
Just have half a day of free thought.
Exactly.
And do you not take your phone with you? Are you pencil and paper?
Both, as long as I'm not checking emails.
Yeah, that's the killer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. Because I'm in this mindset of whether I should do that. Obviously, just set up my own business. So I was chatting to a couple of lads from Creative AI. Did you meet them the other night?
I did.
Roloff and Alex, who are just like incredibly interesting guys and really smart. And they told me about this thing called Conrad's Law. Did they get onto this?
No.
So I don't think it's a law. I think it's more Conrad's opinion, to be honest. But Conrad's Law states that a company's product will reflect exactly its culture and how it's set up. So if you look at Google, like you've got Google Maps, you've got Google Docs, you've got Android, you've got Google Earth.
Yeah.
They're culturally a very compartmentalised business, apparently, and so as a result, and those things don't really talk to each other. I mean, I guess they would say that they do, and I guess they do to a degree.
Yeah.
But it's not like it's lots of small departments talking to each other as opposed to being a whole. And I thought that, me having set up this business, like, well, right, if that's true, then I absolutely must prioritise creative and strategic thought that's unhinged from the day to day. Because if I'm just sat in there, being a kind of email monkey, then that's what will come out, right? I'll just be like an email reading
You
business.
can see the genesis of it from the beginning. It will reflect on the outcome.
So I'm toying with the idea of just having Friday off to think creatively and strategically. Which is tomorrow.
It's tomorrow.
No emails to me.
Fantastic.
So I'll let you know how that goes, man. But I'm slightly nervous. But then, do I not check my email at all, or do
Well, this is the question, isn't it? Can you not check email for a day?
I can. But what's the cost of doing that?
What's the cost?
That's the
you decide the cost.
Hey, whose podcast is it? Right, okay, cool. So we've done half an hour of getting to know you.
Right.
I've got to stop doing that in a weird voice. So this is the Shiny New Object podcast, where we look at latest cool shit in marketing and then try to get under the skin of it a bit.
Yeah.
I just did a podcast with Dave and Patrick, and their Shiny New Object was the human brain and technology, which was really good. But we've decided to talk about blockchain.
We have. We have indeed.
Can you... Right, this is the worst question possible. Can you explain what blockchain technology is without saying distributed ledger?
I can try. I can try.
So we can assume a kind of beginner level understanding of blockchain for the audience of this podcast. Yeah. But how do you describe it to your mates who don't work in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a big problem in general. Not being able to summarise something that is on the at the base of it very, very simple, but it's a democratised way of recording transactions without a gatekeeper through a networked collection of computers that only a certain subscribed group of people can be part of. And the way that they arrive at a decision is through creating consensus between the group of computers. So this is where the kind of non-hierarchical middleman or non-existent, the getting rid of the middleman, should I say, happens or occurs, is each transaction is verified on a random basis by one of the computers in the designated system. I think I've actually made that more complicated than it needed to be. I was just trying to dodge the whole distributed ledger thing.
You might just chuck it in. Okay, so I think that was a great description, but can you give me an example of that in action to help bring that to life?
Sure. I mean, I think that the way that a lot of people describe it is like having a shared Google Doc with lots of or a notebook that's left in a car by one of the members of the group, but everybody else has the same notebook with the same notes in at the same time. And
why left in a car? That seems like a...
It just seems to be one of those examples that happen. I mean, I can't remember the last time I left anything in a car, but there you go. So
I like that description of a Google Doc. Okay, so why are you interested in blockchain?
So I guess within the... I'm just going to sort of refer it back to marketing.
Yeah.
And look at where we're at with marketing. I guess the key areas for the marketing community for blockchain have been in our sort of fraud verification, security, creating transparency and trust between brands and the consumer, and sort of tracking influencers. Blockchain at the moment, as far as I can see, within the marketing space, is used as a verification and tracking device within a trusted community of users, which certainly improves trust and efficiencies within the marketing space, and I can see how that could potentially be used to further the relationship between brands and consumer. But I guess the application of the blockchain within the creative space that I'm interested in is perhaps a more community-led version of that, where we're looking at community building within the marketing space as a kind of a new and democratized entity.
Can we just jump back 1 second to the marketing applications of blockchain before we get into the art world, which is fascinating? You talked about fraud verification and tracking influencers. So can you describe specifically how a brand who is listening to this podcast could use the blockchain to do both those two things?
So, for example, there's this company called Ternio. I don't know if you've come across that. TERNIO, which has been set up specifically to do this for the marketing and ad industry. And they use blockchain technology to verify users, pay publishers, and basically protects agencies from ad fraud, which I think is one of the main focuses of blockchain technology as applied to the marketing space.
Okay, so how does that work? How does that practically
So
manifest itself?
it's basically blockchain can be used to identify bots who kind of pose as consumers through the click-through dynamic. So the blockchain technology can verify whether the click-through is being activated by an actual real person or by a bot, which is very useful.
Yeah.
Within the marketing space.
And what kind of stage are they at? Are they an established business now? Or are they getting?
They're definitely 2017 last year was very much the establishing kind of curve or point of development, and now these businesses are being recognised and used, and will be increasingly so over the next sort of 18 months, I would imagine, because obviously that is a key problem within the community.
And sorry to get super into this, but I think it's fascinating. So how is their blockchain or the technology that Turnio is using alongside the blockchain? How does that detect whether it's a bot or a person clicking on an ad?
Well, basically, every transaction will have an identity, which is
a transaction is
a click-through or...
oh, do you mean transaction after the click-through? Okay.
Exactly.
So
but you can set things up as a identifiable structure in the first place. So one of the key features of blockchain is that every transaction or every action that is performed on the blockchain will have a unique identity. So everything is traceable and accountable and trackable. So that technology works very well for programmatic, for example. That's certainly a space where blockchain is developing within the marketing space as well. And I think identity and transparency features within the technology of blockchain are going to be increasingly used by marketeers.
And how about the trading influencers? Tracking influencers. Sorry, I can't even read my own handwriting.
So again, influencers, their kind of veracity or genuine influence can be traced through the blockchain technology by detecting whether the influencers have statistical clout or actually have quantifiable followers. So click farms, for example, will be something of the past if this technology is implemented in a true and consensus building fashion.
And is that Turnio doing that as well, or is that?
I believe that they are. I think that I do think there are a number of different startups that are aiming to look at that. There is a startup called Behaviour Exchange, who are aiming to tokenise user behaviour, offering a sort of credit system between advertisers and the consumer, aiming to really sort of remove the middlemen managing big media. I guess it was going to be inevitable that this is becoming a dynamic or a pattern of behaviour, but there is a real move to get rid of the middleman and become like the source.
And how does that work, I wonder, with people having the ability to sell their own data? Because there was a couple of startups in the last kind of 4 or 5 years where you could declare who you were, and even put your social contacts and even your bank details. And I did it. I can't remember the name of the company, but I'd get these notifications going, "You've earned £1.52 from your data this week."
I think, and that's taking like the big picture stance as well, looking at it as blockchain as a social changer or signifier, something that's going to change social behaviour that will obviously have a knock-on effect on how marketers, kind of consume and use data with their clients. So the drive towards transparency and ownership of data that's encouraged by the blockchain technology has to be anticipated, I would suggest, by brands and their agencies, and well in advance, in order to be reactive and responsive to that.
And so if you listen to this podcast and you're a marketer and you think, right, that makes a lot of sense, other than speaking to these startups, and I'll share the links in the show notes, how would a brand go about using blockchain technology? What's an kind of easy step or a first port of call?
I would say look at the startups within your particular area of expertise, but I would also say look at some of the more open source kind of startups, particularly those working on the Ethereum blockchain structure as opposed to any other. I think that increasingly the kind of smart contract space is going to be a really interesting space for marketers to look at as well.
Can you take 2 steps back there?
Yeah. Sorry, shall I define Ethereum?
Yeah.
So we'll go for Ethereum.
I know what it is mostly.
So Ethereum is the alternative to Bitcoin, or one of the main competitors to the Bitcoin structure. It's built on blockchain, but the thing about Ethereum is it is actually a much more open structure and infrastructure. It offers a lot more services, but it's also one of the main providers and developers of something called a smart contract, which differs from a cryptocurrency in the sense that you can add more clauses and definition onto each transaction.
So
within the chain.
I can watch you at Innovation Social.
Yeah.
And you presented on a blockchain panel, and it was you and who else spoke? Anyway, and then the lady sat next to me, put her hand up and went, "What's a smart contract?"
What's a smart contract? Exactly.
Can you get super specific on what that is?
So smart contracts are essentially, if you think about the blockchain in the most simplistic terms, it's a series of transactions. So if you look at a smart contract, it's a series of transactions that have, if you do this, then this will happen, clauses within them. So you can build upon a blockchain or look at a blockchain as a series of super safe consensus building contracts between businesses or between people. So, for example, there is an organisation called Materium who are using smart contracts to bring the digital into the physical realm, whereby they're using smart contracts to within the real estate space to formulate mortgage contracts between clients and businesses. So smart contract is essentially a transaction within the blockchain infrastructure that has more information, that has the potential to have more information and more use cases, use clauses that can be applied to each transaction. So it's really creating a bespoke environment in which businesses can use the blockchain technology.
So can you give me like a fictional example of I'm a brand? I'm Argos.
Yeah.
And I've gone and found some startups in my area
Yes.
that are supplying services that are using Ethereum technology. Like,
Yeah.
how can you just talk through how that might play out?
So they're using Ethereum technology, startups, and they want to work in collaboration with Argos.
Yeah.
That you might well use a blockchain, a smart contract to set up a contract of collaboration between the two parties, or quite simply a means of a contract of payment. So you could transfer all of the payments mechanisms that you have within your business and put it onto an Ethereum smart contract, so that both parties were walking into the situation with the trust and with the kind of clauses in place before that collaboration even began. But it would be automatically verified. It wouldn't need either party to be the gatekeeper. It would be an entity of it on its own.
So, have I understood this right? That you'd say, okay, startup X, you are going to deliver me 50,000 downloads of my app, and you will do this by Sunday, the 12th of May, and you won't use any bots to do this, and you won't let anyone under the age of 16 download this.
Yeah.
And if someone delivered all of those things, that would automatically trigger payment because there was a smart contract that tracked each of those digital actions.
That's explained much better than I would have.
Right.
That was exactly what I was trying to kind of get my finger on.
And so there's some interesting uses that I've heard of conversationally in the art world. I think around legitimising what an actual artwork is, who owns what, what's the value of so and so. But when you spoke at Innovation Stories, which was excellent, you talked about some really creative uses of the blockchain in pure art.
You can say pure art. And
what's the proper term for that? I don't know.
I don't know. I'd move away from, I'm trying to move away from all of that as well, because I think the two, the fine art worlds, if you like,
Thank you.
and the marketing and advertising space are becoming more and more entwined due to technologies that have a creative application.
Tell me more about that.
I think that the advertising world and the fine art world have always had, super clear connections and, influence over each other. But because the technology that we use is becoming a kind of democratic platform, i.e. artists are using creative applications of technology, and people working in digital agencies are, and people that are within have a creative output within a more consumer or commercial space are using the same tools as artists, if you like, within the art world are. Then I think there's a common medium that's kind of bringing them together. And I think the influence at the moment is really interesting to see between the two. And it's not just because of the medium. I think it's also the fact that a lot of artists are working with the medium but also critiquing the digital world. And I think a lot of advertising and some of the most interesting ideas that are coming out of the marketing space are becoming more involved with the kind of network effect of our lives.
Okay, so give me an example. Where have you seen that crossover really produce a kind of rich outcome?
I would say that there hasn't been a rich outcome. I don't think
there's a rich outcome. I love a rich outcome. I'm just losing the speak like human beings. Apologies. A rich outcome. Like so you're saying it's crossing over. Like when's that work well?
It's crossing over, but I think that going back to blockchain, I think that there is more leverage that the marketing and advertising space can get out of a consensus building, community building structure such as a blockchain. So the core motivation behind blockchain is tokenization. So people need to buy into the idea or the particular use of blockchain, to create the community around it, to create the infrastructure itself. So I think that is perhaps not being spoken about as much as perhaps the kind of fraud evasion and other more kind of practical uses, if you like, if I can use that word, of blockchain within the marketing space. So perhaps it might be interesting to look at other ways of community building, because I mean the blockchain is actually being described as potentially the new internet. So it's got all sorts of utopian baggage loaded upon it, and expectation is high that it will create this kind of new free and open web again. But what does that mean to marketers? What is the knock-on effect of that? And I think that's in a really interesting space to kind of interrogate, perhaps now as the technology is developing, and it's still very nascent, it's still at the very beginning. So maybe it's now that the bigger, more kind of abstract ideas need to be played out.
And so from the fine art world, what are the most interesting examples that you've seen of using the blockchain for?
Well, I think, to be honest, the art world is kind of at the same stage as the rest of the creative community, in the sense that they're still figuring out exactly what the ramifications of the technology are. So artists typically comment and critique existing cultural or social artifacts. So the work that I've seen on, kind of referencing or using the blockchain from fine artists has been more kind of critique on the existing blockchain technology, rather than using blockchain technology for, a really interesting purpose. So maybe what we need to do is reference back to the genesis of this, which are the creative technologists and technologists and developers using and developing the blockchain technology, and looking at possible use cases, and looking at how the market behaves towards them, but towards blockchain, because I think that nobody knows quite what to do with it, including artists.
So give me an example of an artist using blockchain to comment on it.
So I think I showed you a couple of examples. I think there was one that is perhaps one of the clearest examples, which was Sarah Friend's game, where it was a mining game that I showed you.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest, kind of effects of blockchain technology is the environmental deficit that we're experiencing because of the sheer computer power needed to generate the transactions on the blockchain, which is basically using up a lot of resource and having a direct effect on the environment. So Sarah's game...
I heard it said that, was it Bitcoin in a year uses as much power as Ireland?
Ireland. I think that's the classic example,
right,
isn't
okay.
it? Yeah. So, I mean, that's definitely a thing. But there are ways to get around it, though. I mean, this is the other thing. It's all of this is not inevitable. I mean, this is one of my favourite writers and developers and scientists on it is Jaron Lanier, who kind of always says, technological development and evolution is not inevitable. We have control over the way that it plays out. So if blockchain technology is having a negative effect on the environment, then surely we should be anticipating ways of counteracting that already, whether it's through looking at alternative sources of energy or devising technological solutions to actually counteract the kind of mining process itself. So this is where I think we need to become a lot more involved in the technology itself.
So we've got to wrap it up now, unfortunately. So if a marketer's, I think that's great advice to go and find where the startups are, and don't
worry too much about the ins and outs of the technology. Think about how your business is going to be compatible with a blockchain model, and if it's not, don't do it, because blockchain is not the solution for everything. I think that it'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next 12 months. But I think
what do you think's going to happen? What's your view next 12 months in blockchain and marketing?
Well, the hype bubbles burst, yeah. So that all happened last year, and I think that moving forward, I think that a lot of talk is revolving around the kind of tokenization, utility token area, but also the biggest one is the platform. So at the moment, we've got Ethereum, which presents to us an alternative, one of the only credible alternatives to Bitcoin. So the platform itself is going to have to, market is going to have to diversify and find a competitive pool to play in. And I think that's definitely something that we need to watch over the next 12 months, that other platforms will be springing up, hopefully, around
And when you say platforms,
Ethereum.
you mean...
So Ethereum is a platform for blockchain.
Yeah.
But it's not the only one.
Yeah.
But it has a credibility about it because of market forces around the ether and the way that different, I guess it has a brand identity because of the nature of the brands that are getting involved in using the Ethereum infrastructure. So it's a whole market ready to be developed. And
so you mean new platforms on top of the Ethereum
on top of
platform?
Ethereum, but also as well as... So in competition with... So the competition pool is non-existent at the moment. I think that's certainly a growth area that's going to happen over the next 12 months, and it needs to happen because otherwise there will be a kind of narrowing of the market almost prematurely if this thing's going to have legs, which I hope it does, because it does provide, I think, at the moment, intangible but very exciting prospects for perhaps a new way of communicating brand's identity across the consumer market.
Well, that is a profound and beautiful place to leave it. Wow, that was excellent. I thought I understood blockchain better than I do. You've clearly proved to me that I don't. And it was really great to see some practical examples of how marketers can use it. And I'm certainly going to check out those couple of startups you mentioned, because I think that'll be a really good first step. So if people want to stay in touch with you, how would they get in touch?
They can get me on Goldsmiths digital website, or you can find me on Twitter at Rachel Falconer.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.